hunger in the African nation of Somalia, the result of 2 years of civil war and an unrelenting drought. An estimated 60% of the 6 million people in Somalia are now at risk of starvation and death. On Friday, more than 100 leaders of 8 major African-American church denominations held a summit meeting with officials from the State Department, the United Nations, and several non-profit aid organizations. The event focused on the situation in Somalia and the relief effort to help the Somali people. This event, which you will now see, lasts about 2.5 hours. It was sponsored by the Congress of National Black Churches in conjunction with the relief and development agency called AfriCare and with the Constituency for Africa, also known as CFA, a coalition of organizations and groups with linkages to the African continent.
Good morning. Is it working? Can you hear me? Good morning. If everyone could be seated, please. We're going to start the meeting for today. And we want to start the meeting by asking if the Reverend Gary Simpson from the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York, would come forward to offer the invocation. Reverend Simpson.
Let us pray. Eternal God, how grateful we are for this gathering on this day. We celebrate the fact that we have come from various destinations and charges and responsibilities to this one place. We also come not only in celebration but with concern about Somalia and the rest of Africa. As we struggle together as children of that diaspora who do not know from whence we have come, we pray that we shall keep our minds stayed on our responsibility to our kindred in the blood, in your blood, and kindred in the soil of Africa, our mother continent. We ask, O God, that thou would bless our endeavors here, consecrate our conversation, that we shall not just come here for talk, but also to respond to thy call to us to do justice and to love mercy. We pray, O God, now for that which we are to hear, that we shall take back from this place and impart it into our various constituencies, that we together may rally now at this most crucial and sacred hour to do that which is pleasing in thy mighty sight. And we know that thou art able to bless the work of our hands and the thoughts of our heads, that together we shall do greater things than we ever imagined. For these things we ask in thy mighty name. Bless us now, we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Welcome to the Emergency Summit on Somalia. My name is Forrest Branch, and I'm the Constituency Development Officer here at AfriCare. Allow me for a brief moment to extend a warm welcome to our panelists from the Department of State, the OAU, AfriCare, and Africa Watch. I should also extend a warm welcome to the African Diplomatic Corps, the members of Congress and the Senate, the Somalian community, and our very special guests, the board members and delegates representing the Congress of National Black Churches. The summit is unique in a historical context, but more importantly, it conveys the message to our government and to the international community that African Americans stand ready to help shape the course of events in Somalia and Africa at large. This gathering effectively initiates the beginning of the African American response to the crisis in Somalia. What better institution for AfriCare to collaborate with than the Congress of National Black Churches? The church, after all, is perhaps one of the greatest depositories of hope left in this world. Having said that, let me introduce you to someone who has been working diligently over the last month, assisting in putting this meeting together. the Director of Development for the Congress of National Black Churches, Sullivan Robinson.
Thank you very much, Forrest. First of all, let me welcome each of you, and especially the clergy who responded to our plea for attendance at this very important meeting today. We, as I guess many of you, in seeing the images on the television, knowing what was happening to our sisters and brothers in Somalia, perhaps asked two questions, at least two questions. First, what's being done about this? And number two, what can we do? So when our friends at AfriCare approached the Congress of National Black Churches, we responded in a very quick yes. This is important for us to do. The Congress of National Black Churches is a coalition of the 8 historic denominations. Those 8 denominations include the African Methodist Episcopal, the African Methodist Episcopal Zions, the Christian Methodist Episcopals, the Church of God in Christ, the National Baptist Convention of America, the National Baptist Convention USA, the National Missionary Baptist Convention of America, and the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I mention those to reiterate that together, those denominations represent 65,000 churches across the country and over 19 million people. Yes, we knew it was our role to host this meeting and to begin this campaign to help. And when they came over to talk to us, our executive director did what he so often does in our leadership of our programs that we operate daily, was to say very quickly, let us turn our attention to this mobilization. Let us put forth our best effort on it, and we're committed to that task. So we're so pleased that you have come with us to join us in that task. For the programs that are operated nationally of the Congress of National Black Churches, if you look in your packets, you will see that we already operate across the country for national programs. They are the Leadership Development Program for Pastors that many of you are familiar with, Project Spirit. We also operate the Economic Development Program, and we operate a national anti-drug campaign. These are domestic initiatives. We know now that it is important that we get on the international front. And I'm so pleased to present to you this morning the person who offers the leadership, the administrative leadership for this effort. He is a person who can be counted on to see this effort through and see it through successfully. I am proud to present to you the Executive Director of the Congress of National Black Churches, the Reverend H. Michael Lemons, who will serve as moderator for today. Reverend Lemons.
Thank you so much, Sully, and good morning to you one and all. We would like to welcome you to this summit meeting, this emergency meeting on the situation in Somalia. We're certainly appreciative to those of you who've traveled across the country to be here with us and for the vision that you have of African Americans in this country responding to the needs of our sisters and brothers across the waters. This gathering is structured for us to receive information from persons who represent the State Department, the United States Agency for International Development, and for us to be briefed and informed on the situation there, to hear the questions that you may have, and then to develop a strategy that will allow us to respond not as a black church in America, but as the black church in America across our several denominations. We do not see this as a meeting and lifting an offering, and then that's the end of it. We would like to have a continuing focus upon the needs of our sisters and brothers across the waters for some point and period into the future. If the Bible is clear upon anything, it is clear upon our mandate to be compassionate and to be responsive to those who are in need. And the fact that there are many miles that separate us across land and water should be of no consequence to us. Before I introduce and bring on the other persons who are to present to us this morning, I would like to just share my own perspective on the problem in a very brief and summary fashion. And that is to note the fact that we are hearing about the thousands of persons who are dying daily. I think the numbers are being quoted at 2,000 children who are dying daily. But you know what I've been thinking about? I've been thinking about the fact that I'm a father of 2 little boys, and how I would feel to lose one of my boys, and how a parent must feel to lose a child. So it's not just the large numbers. It's hard to even conceptualize what it's like for 2,000 people to be dying daily. But think about one child and the infinite value of human life and the loss of that life. That's what we are being called upon to respond to. And I think that we have the wherewithal to make a difference. Let me at this time call upon the persons who are to bring greetings. First of all, we would like to bring to the podium Mr. C. Payne Lucas, who is the Executive Director here at AfriCare, who has given extraordinary leadership in the development of this major African-American relief and development agency, was responsible for the acquisition of this property, and has given superb leadership to AfriCare in development needs. Let's welcome Mr. C. Payne Lucas.
Thank you. I'm going to try and keep my remarks short. We do have a long agenda, but I would like to start out by, on behalf of our board of directors, to welcome all of you here, to extend our special appreciation and thanks to the Black Church, which has played a pivotal role since day one in the creation of the AfriCare movement. In fact, for those of you who do not know it, you are standing and you are seated on the grounds of what was paid for by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, all of this outside here. So the church has been a major player here through Bishop Adams, who has been on our board for a number of years. I'm delighted that so many members of the diplomatic corps who are not from Somalia but from Africa are represented here today. Now, this cause is so powerful that it's really difficult for me to talk about it. One is that the agenda of the Black Church is already full of domestic problems here at home, problems in Haiti and other places. But the simple truth of the matter is, and I think it was Edmund Burke who said, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. Now, we have been reading daily about the fact that the reason that we cannot help the Somalis is because the warring warlords in Mogadishu and other places are fighting each other, so you cannot get the kind of peace and security in order to bring the kind of assistance that the people need. Now, I simply ask this group, if this were happening in London, Paris, Bonn, Moscow, would we just let the Russians and the French just die because of warring factions? Whatever peace is needed in Somalia in order to get assistance to the people who are dying there and who are already, in many cases, eating each other's flesh, then we have to get the peace there. If some American boys or some Chinese boys or Japanese boys or Arabic boys or African boys who must die in order to bring security to Somalia, then we must do it, to do less. We do not deserve to exist as people of the church or anything else, because what's happening in Somalia is worse than what happened in Treblinka, because there death was fast. To die from hunger, to die from disease is the most painful kind of death at all. It will not be good enough for us, Africa, and the leadership of the black church to assemble here today and make just a financial commitment or a Sunday offering to bring assistance to Somalia. That will not be enough. We're talking about a long-range commitment for our brothers and sisters on the African continent, not just Somalia, because until the Africans are free, African Americans cannot be free. There is no way you can be free. Simply put, and in brutal language, first of all, you can never be white. Whatever you take and wherever you go, you will be an African American as long as you live. Now, we are a country founded on pluralism, cultural democracy. What makes America great, what makes this a great country, is because we are groups of people who came from other places. And in America, you get no results unless you are well organized. That's just the facts of life. Some people said they were upset because Waleska came here from Poland and went home with $950 million worth of credits and cash for his people of Poland. And I applauded him simply because Polish Americans are well organized, and those of us in the government and in Congress understand that kind of political power. Now, you know what? It's time for African Americans to become organized. Because let me tell you, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, by the year 2000 in America, many of you won't even be able to get a cup of coffee in English because the people from the South are coming. They're going to be well organized. And we need to join ranks with all of those people and organize ourselves so that we can get the kinds of results that we need in Africa and other places. And the most democratic thing you can do in America, the most American thing you can do, is to organize people for action. That's what democracy is all about. So let me close in the words of Victor Hugo. When the earth was born and spiritual, and the oldest planet was new, and before God ordered the chaos and painted the heaven with blue, he ordained one sacred commandment in the midst of primeval night, that the glory of life is struggle, and the secret of progress is fight. So rejoice in the midst of sorrow, and smile through all your tears. Hold on to the bright tomorrow, and fight through all your fears. Transform your troubles to triumphs. This is God's oldest plan. The glory of life is struggle. Go out and face Somalia like a woman or a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. As Mr. Lucas indicated, one of the problems that plagues us as African Americans is the fact that we are not organized to have an organized response to situations of crises in our community and around the world. AfriCare has taken the leadership in developing a constituency for Africa and has appointed a very energetic, enterprising, and exciting young man to give leadership to this effort, Mr. Melvin Foote, who we'd like to introduce and bring to the podium at this time. Let's welcome him as he comes.
Distinguished guests, it really is an honor and a real pleasure to have you all with us today. I personally have lived in Somalia for 3 years. I was AfriCare's country director from 81 to 84, based in Mogadishu, and I'm hoping to go to Somalia next week with Congressman Donald Payne. So it's, this crisis that really personally has touched me greatly, and I'm really honored that you all are here and showing concern because the people of Somalia really do need our help. You'll find that the people in Somalia are very dignified, very hard-working, very strong people, and it's not like you're going to be going out there dealing with a bunch of beggars. These people have so much pride, and that pride is something that we all need to share here in this country. The Constituency for Africa is a coalition of organizations and groups with interest in Africa. We're 2 years old, and what we're trying to do is to build links between our organizations and groups in this country to learn about Africa, to link up with Africa, to be more in touch with our people on the continent. We've trying to build links with a number of national organizations, with the Congress, with the State Department, with the World Bank, with the groups like the church organizations, with the groups like the AKAs and the Links, the Jack and Jill. We're trying to share the information that we at Africa know. We've known about Somalia for at least 2 years, and we've been trying to talk about Somalia, but the public generally has not responded because they have not seen those images on TV. And so they're saying, well, Mel Foote talking about Somalia, well, you know, we're hearing about Yugoslavia, we're hearing about other crises in the world. So for many people in the country, Somalia was not real. But we think if we can build these links and strengthen these links that are necessary, we can be on an ongoing sort of response to the crisis and to the people in generally across the African continent. Joining me and welcome you are two of my colleagues in forming the Constituency for Africa. The Constituency for Africa is more than AfriCare. AfriCare is just one member of more than 200 groups and organizations that are affiliated now with CFA. And we think that it's a real nouveau, really a progressive aspect of helping people in Africa. But we think that ultimately, by working together and building common goals, we're not only going to help people in Africa, but we're certainly going to strengthen African-American relationships. So joining me are two of my colleagues in the CFA, Marva Jo Camp, who's the legal counsel for the Subcommittee on Africa of the House of Representatives. I'll have Marva come first.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many of you to come out for what we see as a big crisis. I think it's indicative of the kind of attention and the care and concern that we're seeing among African Americans and all aspects of the community in support of crisis going on in Africa. Mel asked me to speak briefly about CFA and what role it has been playing in terms of bringing greater attention to the problems in Africa. As he mentioned, I am legal counsel for the Subcommittee on Africa. When CFA was first initiated over 2 years ago, I think you were seeing in some respects a waning in terms of the ability of the community to lobby on behalf of Africa. And what happened in that is that you also saw a decrease in the kind of money that was being put or made available for Africa. In the past 2 years, because of the CFA and because of others who have showed greater concern, more vocal concern about what's going on in Africa, you have seen an increase in terms of the attention given on the part of Capitol Hill and also in terms of the money. In the past 2 years, we were able to go up from $300,000 for the entire continent of Africa to $1 billion. What we're also seeing, however, $1 million. What we are seeing, however, is the necessity of using the groups within CFA to make a statement in terms of that Africa is on the top of people's agenda. It is on the top of the agenda for Congress. It needs to be on the top of the agenda for the administration. And so what we have done is to form an umbrella organization, i.e. CFA, to bring together different groups who may have had the kind of organizing ability to be able to come to the Hill based on their own organizing ability within their own other organizations. One of the key facets of CFA is a religious community. We have long well understood the ability of the religious community to gather people, to gather resources, to come together on behalf of causes. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that those kind of resources, that ability is given to other persons who are now just learning how to organize themselves on behalf of Africa. It makes a big difference. It makes a humongous difference because when you have people coming up on the Hill asking for more money, you have people coming up on the Hill asking for greater resources, we respond. If we see the faces there, we respond. I would also mention the diplomatic corps has been key in terms of making Africa a priority on Capitol Hill. And what we're trying to do is expand that effort and to continue that effort. Last year, during the Congressional Black Caucus weekend, we had for the first time a collaboration with the Subcommittee on Africa, with the Constituency for Africa, to put on a brain trust about Africa. We had hundreds of people, and the response to that was tremendous. This year, we're doing it again on the 25th of September. We're having CFA and the Subcommittee on Africa again during the Congressional Black Caucus weekend, talking about Africa aid and trade. And I think it's critical that they see the numbers up there so that they can be supportive and know that there are those out there who make a difference and who are their constituents who vote for them. And that if they don't make Africa a priority, then they won't get the votes that they want in terms of coming back to Congress. I would also mention in closing that Congressman Dimely is now in Somalia or on his way back from Somalia. And early next week we'll be having a press conference to talk about some of the things that he sees going on firsthand. And so we hope as many of you can show your support for the press conference so that we can keep Somalia on the front of everybody's agenda, because as long as it stays on the front, then politicians will listen, people who can give resources will listen, and maybe we can do something to help what's going on in Somalia.
I also want you to hear from Alice Sharp, who's with the Africa News Service, who's also one of the coordinators of the Constituency for Africa.
Good morning. Africa News Service is a nonprofit news organization based in Durham, North Carolina. And our affiliation with CFA started to chronicle the growth of CFA. And I'm so happy to have this occasion to have you here, because it shows, it's just another element of the fact that CFA has caught hold and it is being effective and it is reaching the people that we want, that it needs to reach. Just as Africa News has been for the past 20 years trying to reach the American public to educate them about Africa, about all facets of Africa, of the continent. The media is so important in shaping our perceptions of anything, place, or event. And that's an understatement to say that the American media has done a great deal to shape our perceptions of Africa. And at Africa News, we try to bring you a different slant, the truth, which is something that is not always obvious in what we read or see in the American media about Africa. As I said, we have been in business for 20 years. We do quite a bit of background work for for public radio. We do radio programming for them. We do stories for Washington Post, New York Times. In fact, we're the only full-service news agency based here in the United States that provides news of Africa. This gathering is wonderful because one of the purposes, as Marva stated, of CFA is to reach the American public, the African-American public in particular, to become an advocate for Africa. And it is essential, as she stated, to have the churches, because as we know, through the churches we're able to reach a large segment of African American community for which there's just no other avenue to do so. So again, thank you for being here this morning. I hope we will see many of you again, as we have seen many of you in the past. But this is something whose time has come. CFA is here, and there are many, many ways in which we can benefit our own communities as well as the continent of Africa. Thank you.
Thank all of you for your presentations. We would like to call at this time Mr. H. Martin Cheshires, who is the Director of the Office of East African Affairs at the Department of State, to brief us on the situation in Somalia from the perspective of the State Department. We really have two interests here, one of which is organizing support from the black church. The other is learning what the U.S. government is doing in response to the situation, and hopefully Mr. Cheshires can provide some light on that, as well as give us a better understanding of the internal situation there within Somalia.
Excuse me. I'll give you a very quick rundown. Actually, I was going to talk mostly on the internal situation, but I see I'm listed as the U.S. in Somalia, so I'll maybe gloss over, give you a very quick rundown of the internal situation and tell a little bit about what the U.S. is doing primarily on the political side. I don't know, John Hicks is not coming? Okay, well, maybe then I'll get in a little bit more onto what we're doing on the aid side. I was going to leave that to him. I don't have prepared remarks on it, so you'll have to excuse me if I wing it. What's happening politically in Somalia, I guess, comes as a result of 21 years of misrule by Siad Barre, which undermined what unity had existed in Somalia. Before independence, there were basically two groups that led the fight for independence, one in what was formerly the British Somaliland and another group in what was formerly Italian Somaliland. Following independence, Somalia had 9 years of true multi-party democracy. Frankly, something that lasted longer than in many, many, many other countries in Africa. Unfortunately, that was put to rest by Siad Barre's coup d'etat in 1969. During the years that Siad, and I give you this background because I think it puts in perspective what's happening now. During this period, what has happened is Siad has used one clan to use them against another clan, and has created this idea in Somali politics that I have to take care of myself and my brethren in my clan, and that gaining political power is the only way that I take care of my people, my family, my sub-clan even. And that's what's in effect put Somalia to the state of ruin that it's in right now. What's happening now on the political side, too, is that what you have are a number of factions that are fighting with each other, some physically fighting, some simply controlling territory. Of late, there may have been some alliances made between these factional leaders, these factions. Each one of them is based either on a clan or on a sub-clan. The parts of the country, first you have what was formerly British Somaliland, which has now proclaimed its own independence, not recognized by anybody, and it's controlled by one of the movements that have been fighting against Siad Barre, the Somali National Movement. You have the northeastern part of the country, which is peopled by the majority of whom are a clan known as the Majeerteen, and they're controlled by a movement known as the the SSDF. Excuse me. That area has been relatively peaceful over the last 2 years. Mogadishu itself has been run by a movement which had liberated it, if you will, from Siad Barre, the United Somali Congress. The problem there is you've had basically a falling out between two sub-clans of the Hawiya clan that run that. And each one side you have a movement led by the person who calls himself the president of Somalia, the interim president, Ali Mahdi Mohammed, and on the other side, his former ally within the United Somali Congress, they are now on the outs, General Aidid, who leads basically a movement of the Habragida sub-clan. In the south, you have a mixture of peoples. They used to be controlled, that was the territory that was controlled by the Agadeni, by the Marahan clan of former dictator Siad Barre. In April, I guess it was, of this past year, Siad Barre tried to move on Mogadishu, and that finally led to his expulsion from the country when he moved close to about 25 kilometers from Mogadishu, and General Aidid, in alliance with some other factions in the south, forced him out of the country and his troops out of the country, and are now in alliance with some of the groups that live in the south, has a tenuous hold somewhat on that part of southern Somalia. That's kind of the setting. How you move from that to bring peace to Somalia is going to be a very, very long and difficult road. There was an attempt first in 1991, two conferences were held in Djibouti with the aim of bringing together some of these various clans and coming up with a government. We at the State Department considered that it was a good attempt, but unfortunately it failed. It failed because it didn't bring everybody that needed to be into the meeting. Some of those groups that participated at the political level, but the military leaders rejected what came out of that meeting, feeling that they should have a greater role, that they had fought for the country. Again, it's this mindset, unfortunately, that I've got to have mine, I've got to be in control, because that's the only way I can take care of my brethren. And now what is happening is that The Secretary General of the United Nations appointed a really excellent diplomat, a former Algerian ambassador, Mohamed Sakhnoun, as his special representative, and he's been spending time in Somalia trying to work all of these problems. He's done an excellent job of winning the confidence, I think, of all of the parties involved, has really played a neutral role. His approach has been that basically what you have to do is bring peace within each region, within each clan grouping first, between the military wings and the political wings and the sub-clans. In effect, a building block approach. Start with them, bring peace there, and then we work to the idea of a national conference that brings Somalia back to its senses, in a sense, to some kind of a nation again. But it's going to be long and difficult because people aren't all willing to sit down and talk with each other. Some of them still, unfortunately, have the illusion that you can unite Somalia at the point of a gun. And I think after all of the killing and the useless death that we've seen over the last couple of years, it's about time that these people learn that it's just not going to work. Now, the U.S. has been playing a role behind the scenes. We've recently appointed a special envoy to Somalia, Ambassador Peter DeVos, who has some history of background in conflict resolution. He had been our ambassador in Mozambique and recently been our ambassador to Liberia. And he's been out in the region the last couple of weeks meeting. He's met with leaders of some of these clans, with General Aidid, with Ali Mahdi, with Abshir Musa, who heads the SSDF, the group that controls the Northeast. He's met with Ambassador Sakhnoun. Basically, what Ambassador DeVos is trying to do is see how we, the U.S. government, in effect, working in the background, can do whatever is necessary to support Ambassador Sakhnoun and his peace efforts. Because we really do have a great deal of respect for Sakhnoun and a great deal of hope that his mission is the only way to go to bring about peace in Somalia. I don't want to go on at length. I probably can talk on this subject for an hour. But let me stop here so that perhaps I'm missing some points that you're really interested in, and I'd be more than happy to field questions and to bring you up to date on some other aspect of the political situation that I may have missed in my quick, broad brush stroke here. Some in the back, one in the back.
I'm Somali, and I'm upset in a way because we know
You could go to the mic. There are mics, a couple of mics on the floor that can be used.
I'm Somali, and I would like to bring out that the U.S. had a chance for Somalia, and it always seems to be one step behind when it comes to Somalia. For instance, in 1990, we had a movement that was peaceful, that recommended a peaceful transitional meeting outside the country. And it was trying to, it understood, this organization called Manifesto, understood at the time that armed movement based on clan cannot represent a national liberation movement, and that each one was working towards a clan hegemony. At this point, we in the United States tried hard to make the U.S. try to support this group. But the U.S., all it did was make a lip service at the time and pretended that clan-based armed oppositions, each of whom does not represent the country in totality, can be called a national movement. Therefore, sir, I think the U.S., you would agree with me there, failed us at that point. It failed us now because it concentrated on talking about Ali Mahdi and Aidid as the solutions for the country. It did not do anything. It never responded to Somalia on time. By March 1991, we knew that all the productive system of the country in terms of farmland, factories have been burned and looted. And we also knew of the human rights abuses. And we also knew of the incoming famine, not to the extent that it does, but at least we knew that it was on the beginning stages. However, and we as an organization wrote a letter to the State Department pinpointing the things that it should do in order to ensure that things do not go to the end point. they say in English, a stitch in time saves 9 later. Okay? That did not happen because the U.S. and all the Western countries had no interest in Somalia, and what they're doing today is ill-defined, too late, and lukewarm to begin with. We would like for change the problem of Somalia be faced in comprehensive fashion, not a piecemeal approach. And we had enough of the gun rule, especially as women. We had enough of the gun rule, and we hope that we get a peacemaking force. They are needed in Somalia more than they're needed in Yugoslavia. Thank you.
Okay. First, I will say no outside group, whatever, can impose peace and a government on Somalia. It is up to Somalis to sit down and talk to each other. That's how you bring it. The U.S. cannot stand here and dictate and say, we designate you as the president of Somalia. That will never work. But let me say, peacekeeping, yes. I think we totally agree with you. Not in its peacekeeping group is going in there, but it's going in there with a specific purpose, not to impose any kind of a political solution on Somalia. Actually we call them security guards, are going in there to ensure, first of all, and primarily, their purpose is to ensure that those people that are dying now because other Somalis are stealing the food that comes in from their mouth. And in fact, the first contingent of Pakistanis are due, if everything goes all right, and we will keep our fingers crossed, due to arrive in Mogadishu over this weekend. The rest will be coming within a matter of days. Their role is to help food deliveries coming into Mogadishu get out to where they're needed and not to fall in the hands of the looters. The United Nations, as I'm sure you've read in the paper, has approved another 3,000, up to 3,000 more security troops. The idea here is to put them in other parts of the country too, again, with the express purpose of ensuring the safe delivery of needed relief supplies. They're not there. And this is part of the problem. There's a misperception, I think, at least in some quarters in Somalia, and that's why we have some resistance, the idea that they're going to be coming in there to impose a peace settlement, to install X person as president of Somalia. Total nonsense. Total nonsense. They're there to get people fed, to stop starvation. Any other questions? Do you want, we're out of time.
We'll take just one more question. We would like if Mr. Cheshire could probably remain with us. It will be a question and answer period.
11:30.
Okay. Okay, I saw a hand over here.
Yeah.
Okay, Wendell.
Thank you, Michael. I don't have really a question, but possibly a hope and a prayer in concert with what the sister just said. I think that we don't hold very much hope for the United States to go into Somalia and to do what it has done in Kuwait in terms of reinstituting someone there. But we do want to lift up, I would believe, the fact that certainly a peacekeeping force is something that we ought to consider. And I just find it ironic that the State Department could take the position that it cannot do that in Somalia as it is done in Panama, as it is done in Grenada, as it just did when the 100 Days War in Kuwait, as it has put a blockade around Nicaragua, around Cuba, as it has done the same thing in terms of interceding into the conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We just feel that there's something amiss in terms of the policy as relates to people of color. And I would hope that you might take the position back that certainly in terms of assisting our folk in Somalia, the first thing that needs to happen is some sense of order so that food and materials can be brought forth with to those persons who need them. And if that means that we can come in concert with the OAU and those persons who are concerned about establishing some degree of peace, not to put somebody in there like we have done in Panama, and like we've done in Kuwait, let the people make that decision, or like we don't want to do again in Haiti, where a democratically elected president is still trying to get back home. But we can't deal with that. We're simply saying, let's establish some parameters for peace and a set of mechanisms where we can get food and supplies and then bring the folks to the table to begin to talk. You can effect that kind of a policy.
Okay. You want to move on? Okay.
Want to respond to that?
No, I'm not, there's no question. It was a statement. You have somebody with it. Oh.
Yes, sir.
Only one question. My name is Hamoud. I would like to know what the United States will do about Somalia being used as a toxic waste dump by the European countries. And that shows the lack of interest by most of the European and the American countries about Somalia, because there was a quotation in the Washington Post that a U.S. diplomat in Nairobi said, why Somalia can't be used as a parking lot, which shows that, and that is a quotation in the Washington Post.
That's an old quotation, yes, I remember seeing that.
And that shows that what he meant is that the Americans don't mind if,
No, that's not what I meant.
Europeans use it as a toxic dump.
I think we do mind. I think that's disgusting what's happened about that, frankly. And this is the first we've heard about it, quite honestly, at the State Department, was the news stories that came out, was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? That was the first news. Unfortunately, it points to the venality also of some of the people, if there is truth to this, some of the people that are so-called leaders out there to make these kinds of deals, to allow their own country to be used for that kind of thing. I think it's absolutely disgusting. And I don't think the State Department, feels that it's not our business. It's just, this is the first news we've had on it when it came out in the press. Anyway.
Unfortunately, we need to move on and to hear from some of our other presenters who are here. Again, we viewed this not as a one-time event, but there will be other occasions for us to convene as the clergy of the African American Church and to hear from persons who represent government here and to have some of our questions responded to. Just arriving is Congressman Donald Payne, who serves on the subcommittee for Africa. He's the congressman from New Jersey. We'd like to welcome him and to bring him to the podium at this time and hear his perspective on the problem. Congressman Payne.
Good morning. First of all, let me commend AfriCare and the Congress of National Black Churches and the Constituency for Africa for calling this very important hearing today to discuss this very extreme situation that I'm sure you've already discussed and heard many facts about. As a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, let me just say very briefly, and to update some persons who may not be aware of the history of the caucus, but back in 1959, Congressman Charles Diggs became active in the whole question of Africa, and he stressed the fact that emerging nations were coming about in Africa and that we should pay more attention to that particular situation. Then in 1969, Congressman Diggs was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and became the chairman of the Subcommittee on Africa. During his tenure, he gave legislative oversight and leadership to programs of relief in Biafra, in Nigeria, and the Sahel region in Africa when that drought afflicted us in the early 70s. It was interesting that Congressman Diggs was named as the United States delegation to the United Nations in 1971. And Congressman Diggs resigned from that position representing the United States at the United Nations because he protested the sale of arms to Portugal being used against Guinea-Bissau and Angola and Mozambique, and arms being sold to South Africa, and that the United States Defense Department was purchasing Rhodesian chrome under the Ian Smith regime. And so that shows that there has always been a difference between African Americans and the policy of the United States as it relates to Africa. As you may know, also, the advocacy had continued by Ron Dellums with the passage in 1986 of the CAAA legislation, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, where we mobilized American support. And we have seen the release of Mr. Nelson Mandela and Mr. Mbeki and Mr. Sisulu and the unbanning of the ANC and bringing attention to the problem of South Africa. Then, of course, we remember our good friend, the late Mickey Leland, who became chairman of the Select Committee on Hunger, who drew attention to the problems of Somalia and Ethiopia. As we know, Congressman Leland lost his life in pursuit of the objectives of increasing awareness of the American people to the plight of Africa. Today, Congressman Merv Dimely serves as chair of the Subcommittee on Africa and has recently returned from an 18-day trip to Africa. being home only 2 or 3 days on Monday, he left for Djibouti to meet with the interim government of Somalia, what's left, and then to attempt to get into Somalia. Last week, we negotiated and argued with the State Department and the Defense Department, Mel Foote and I, trying to get into Somalia, but we were not given permission by the House leadership because they said the threat of danger. But we're still attempting to go. The Congressional Black Caucus attempted to leave last night for Somalia to visit that place with John Lewis leading the delegation. Once again, we were denied a CODEL by Defense and State Department. And so we will continue to push and fight. We will continue to try to get a policy of fairness into our United States House of Representatives. Let me just quote a few things that during 1990, the President and Congress developed what we call a consensus, that the promotion of democracy should be the major objective of the United States foreign policy. So this implies that freedom, self-determination, and the advancement of human rights should be number one. President Bush cited as one of the major objectives of the action against Iraq was the emergence of a new world order, a concept that includes supporting the rule of law and defending the weak against aggression by the strong. That was September the 11th, 1990, at a joint session of Congress. Congress affirmed that, fostering a new world order, freer from threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest of peace as an objective. In a resolution we passed on October 1st, 1990, both the House and the Senate made it clear that we were supporting the President's new policies. We saw safe havens created for the Kurds in northern Iraq under the UN, and we saw the introduction of so-called humanitarian intervention. UN Secretary Boutros-Ghali has repeatedly stated that the reason for the UN's slow action in Somalia was because member states would not approve a unilateral intervention into the sovereignty of a member state without their approval. There was an approval for 500 members of Pakistan to go into Somalia. They have not gotten there yet. So let me say that what we have seen as proclamations and what we've seen as actions are certainly two different things. Africa, as you know, has 16 of the 20 poorest countries in the world. Yet the foreign policy of the United States has given $1.3 billion in assistance to Africa compared to 5.5 to 7.1 billion for Egypt and Israel. 1991, the total amount of funds going to Africa was $1,185,000,000. 1992, can you believe it's been reduced to 1.3 million. And so as we see the problems increase, we see the funding decrease. And so that makes no sense to me as a member of Congress. And what we have to do is to make our feelings heard. We have to see that this whole question of 18 months of international neglect for Somalia must end. I know you've heard considerably about what has happened, but when I entered Congress in 1989, I read a headline saying Somalia Army kills 5,000 unarmed citizens. This was about 10 years after the United States decided to switch its alliance from Ethiopia to Somalia. And what I'm saying is that for 10 years we provided weapons and guns because we wanted to deny the Soviets access to the Arabian Seas and protect the United States' strategic interests in the Gulf and the Red Sea, ensuring the flow of Persian Gulf oil. Somalia's airfields and ports were considered important both as refueling and resupplying stations. Then the Cold War threat was reduced, the need for Somalia reduced, the need for other African countries reduced. And as we withdrew our support, we left the guns, we left the weapons. These guns are now in the hands of roving bands of thugs. They make no guns in Somalia. The guns had to come from somewhere else. And so we, as the United States, have an extra responsibility in this whole question because we have supplied the weapons that are being used now against the people there. And so while we watch, as Boutros Ghali called the rich man's war in the former Yugoslavia, we have not seen the attention given to Somalia. One, because of color. There's no question about it. But also, these are Sunni Muslims. And many of us Christians have not sent up missionary programs in Muslim countries where Islamic people are. And so we all share in some of this responsibility. Somalia being one of the poorest countries in the world, and I'm a Baptist. I don't recall any funds from my church going to an Islamic country. And so we have to kind of get away also in the church of simply supporting those who are Christians like us. We shouldn't go to try to change anyone's religion, but we should put our missionary work of aid and schools. You could take a country that's basically Christian in Africa and look at the infrastructure of schools and so forth supported by the black churches. We see very few in Somalia and Djibouti. And so, in conclusion, I'm saying that the United States have extended $6 billion of agricultural credit to the former Soviet Union. And the Freedom Support Act authorizes $620 million in humanitarian and technical support, plus an increase of $12 billion in IMF quota for the Soviet Union. On the other hand, we have seen the reduction in the African Development Fund in fiscal year 91, which was approved to be $1 billion this year, reduced to $800 million, and the approval of $1.2 billion for fiscal year 93, not only reduced to the $800 million of 92, but reduced even below this year to $775 million for the African Development Fund for next year. So what we have to do is that we need all of you to help us to mobilize those members of Congress from your districts, the churches, where we're fighting in the Congressional Black Caucus. 6 months ago, April 10th, we sent a letter to then Secretary of State Baker urging him to ask the United Nations to become more involved in Somalia. 6 months later, we have not seen anything happen much. We see the United States and the United Nations asking the OAU to take on additional responsibilities in trying to solve the problems. As they said, the Organization of American States should solve the problem in Haiti. OAU is practically broke. They only have $2.5 million coming in from the 27 countries. How can they solve the problem of Somalia? The United Nations is $2 billion in debt, incidentally with the United States owing $600 million. And so we have to say to our government, to our representatives, that we want to see a policy that will not be colorblind, that will be colorblind, as a matter of fact. If it wasn't for the International Red Cross that has devoted 1/3 of its world budget to Somalia, the situation would be even much worse. And even though we have gotten some support recently from the United States in its support of grain going to Somalia, I think that we have a tremendous amount to do. And I'm here to urge you as a member of Congress that the Congressional Black Caucus will continually fight to try to get parity. But we must ask you to ask your members of your churches that send a letter to your representatives where you are, not the black members, we're on board, but to the other members of Congress saying that we want our policy to be humanitarian driven. We want our policy to be fair. We don't want different standards for Haiti and Africa and the Caribbean than those apply to other places. And so we will stand 100%. We will continue the 26 strong to be increased by another 13 or 14. We'll have hopefully 39 members of the Black Caucus. Once we continually bring that block up, then we'll be able perhaps to stop some legislation so that Congress will deal with our priorities the same way that they're dealing with other priorities. And so I'm here to say that the Black Caucus stands 100% behind this effort. We will continue to fight with the churches, AfriCare, and other organizations of goodwill. We must change the policy. We must put humanitarian aid first. We must change the face of foreign aid from this country to the world. And so once again, let me commend you for this very important meeting. I'm one that is appalled by the policy of the United States as it relates to Africa and the Caribbean. I'm here to say, together, as we build this constituency for Africa, I believe that we can change that policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman Payne. Has Dr. Kunder arrived from the Agency for International Development, or anyone else here from the aid to speak to us? Okay. If not, we will then move to Dr. Joseph C. Kennedy, who's the Director of International Development for AfriCare.
We shall not always plant while others reap the golden increment of bursting fruit. Not always countenance object and mute that lesser men should hold their brethren cheap. Not everlastingly while others sleep shall we beguile their limbs with mellow flute. Not always bend to some more subtle brute. We were not made eternally to weep. In Los Angeles, in Detroit, in Atlanta, in the District of Columbia, as poor, hungry, homeless, school dropouts, drug-afflicted, the dispossessed, across America and the Caribbean and Haiti, as black people, as people of African descent, we weep. In Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Chad, in the Horn of Africa, in Southern Africa, and South Africa, on this richest continent on the face of the earth, across the continent of Africa, we weep. In Somalia, thanks to the power-hungry clans and individuals and drought, nearly 150,000 people have died over the last year. 1/3 of the total population, nearly 2 million people, face death from hunger and disease. And according to some, over 1/4 of all the children under 5 have already died. You know the statistics. You've seen the pictures, you've read the stories. We question, we can question, we do question whether the United States has been as concerned about Somalia as it has been about other parts of the world. We can question how concerned the United States is about Africa in general. But there's a larger question. And the question is not what has not been done, but the question is what has been done and what must be done. For the last 21 years, AfriCare has worked in the villages of Africa, across the continent, in West Africa, Central Africa, on the Horn, Southern Africa. We've worked in the areas of agriculture and water and health. We've worked with refugees. We've worked to improve the quality of life. Today, AfriCare has over 220 different programs in 27 countries in Africa. For the past 12 years, AfriCare has worked in Somalia. We worked in health care, working with the mothers and infants. We have helped build village wells and water systems and catchment basins to work with the nomadic camel herders in the northeastern part of Somalia. We have planted scrub brush to hold back the encroachment of the desert. We have provided seeds and tools, and we have worked with thousands and thousands of refugees. During our history, we have spent in Africa for development over $150 million. And yet hunger and death still stalk Africa. Today is Somalia. Yesterday, it was Liberia, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa. The day before yesterday, it was Ethiopia, Sudan, and Chad. How can we make tomorrow different? What must we do? We must reclaim our heritage. We must rebuild the links between Africans and Americans of African descent. We must create a single mighty voice building this constituency for Africa, which will become a mighty force for Africa. But we must do even more. We must take action. We know that we live in a society where much is owed us, but we also know that we live in a society where little is promised and nothing is given. From the days of slavery, the black churches, you have been our rock of ages. You have been the little wheel and the big wheel of our existence. Now is the time for the black churches across this land, and you gathered here represent nearly 2/3 of all black people in America. Now is the time to come together to form a partnership with Africa. How much is needed? No amount. 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. No amount can be too much to assure the survival of our sisters and brothers in Somalia, the survival of our sisters and brothers across the continent of Africa, in the Caribbean and Haiti, and our children here in America. To paraphrase, give us your support and we will do the job. We will go to Somalia in the refugee camps on the borders of Ethiopia and Kenya. We will go again to Mogadishu and Koryoli and Bravo and Baidir and Gardo. Give AfriCare your support and we will bear witness that indeed we were not made eternally to weep.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy. Unfortunately, because of the emergency nature of this meeting was called in conflict with the conventions of two of our major denominations, the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated, the National Baptist Convention of America. The beauty of the Congress, however, is that it brings the leadership of these denominations together in one body. I was in Atlanta on yesterday. Dr. Jemison gave me time on his program to speak about this and made a commitment of NBC USA to this agenda. And we've also been in conversation with Dr. E. Edward Jones of the National Baptist Convention of America, who has also committed his support to this agenda. There are a number of persons here, however, who have traveled here at their own expense from around the country, who I think it would be improper not to recognize them and for everyone to have a sense of who's here in this gathering, and would like just briefly, as I call upon you to stand so folk might see you and know who you are. If I overlook anyone from out of town, I would like you to also stand and introduce yourself. And speaking of the clergy, now we have Mr. Raymond Blanks here, who's the Director of Church and Community Issues of Ohio Council of Churches. Ray Blanks, would you stand? Okay, I saw him here earlier, maybe he stepped out for a moment. Bishop McKinley Young, who's the AME Bishop for South Africa. Bishop Young. Dr. Gary Simpson, who's the pastor of Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York. Attorney David Shaheed of Indianapolis, Indiana. Reverend Wendell Anthony of Fellowship Chapel, United Church of Christ. Dr. Dan Stevenson of St. James AME Church in Savannah, Georgia. Bishop Jim Clark of Patterson, New Jersey. Dr. N. Charles Thomas, who's the Secretary of the Board of Personnel Services, Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Reuben Warren, who's the Director of African American Minority Issues at the Centers for Disease Control, Atlanta, Georgia. If there are other clergy persons from out of town who I'm overlooking, would you please stand? We might see you. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. There are other local clergy persons of much prominence and significance who we'd also like to recognize. We would like to call shortly to the podium former Congressman Walter Fancher, who's a pastor in the city, that he might bring remarks just prior to our presentation of Bishop Graves. But there are other local clergy persons who I'd like to have stand and introduce themselves, if they would do so very quickly, starting in the back with Reverend Anthony.
Ward Memorial AME Church in Washington. Leon G. Lipscomb, Allen Chapel, AME Church, Washington, D.C.
Clarence Newsom, Dean of the Howard School of Divinity.
Walter Bryan, Promised Land Baptist Church, Washington, D.C.
Gary Burns, Barrett Memorial AME Zion Church, Washington, D.C.
Margaret Massey, representing Reverend Clinton Austin, Emmanuel Baptist Church, Washington, D.C.
William Logan, St. Mary AME Zion Church in Washington.
In this area, where Zach?
Frederick Zach, Israel Metropolitan CME Church here in Washington.
Wilbert Williams, the First New Horizon Baptist Church, Clinton, Maryland.
I'm Cardon Davis, representing Bunton Institutional CME Church.
Shiloh Baptist Church is also represented here.
Shiloh Baptist?
Shiloh Baptist Church, 9th Peak, Northwest Washington, D.C.
Amen.
Reverend Wallace Smith.
Shiloh Baptist, Reverend Wallace Smith. Bishop Broomfield is here. Stand, Bishop. Bishop Ori Broomfield.
Willie Wilson, Union Temple Baptist Church, Washington, D.C.
Dr. Lewis Miles Memorial CME Church, Washington.
Weldon Thomas, St. John Christian Methodist Episcopal Church here in Washington.
Bishop Joseph Wells, Holy Temple Church of Christ here in Washington.
Paul Hogard, Clinton AME Zion Church, Rockville, Maryland.
Jonathan Weaver, Greater Mount Nebo AME Church, Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
Donald Williams, Director of Racial Ethnic Church Relations for Bread for the World. Amen.
Albert Crawford, Regional Organizer, Bread for the World, and United Church of Christ, Washington.
Amen.
Earliest Lucky Chapel, St. Paul, Christian Community Church, Washington.
Pastor Scott, Grand Baptist Church in Baltimore.
And I'm Bishop Umche from Kenya.
John Gravely, Living Light Ministries, Washington, D.C.
Cultural Presence Zion Baptist Church, Baltimore, Maryland.
I understand also Reverend Patricia Reberg is here from New York City Council of Churches. Thank you so very much for being present. I thought it was important for us to get a sense of who's here. There are persons, as I mentioned, who've traveled here at their own expense, and we certainly are appreciative and indebted to them for their so doing. We'd like to move now into the church's response part of our program, and we would like, before presenting the chairman of the board of the Congress of National Black Churches, to call to the podium one who has been involved in African issues for quite some time, who has served as the chairman of Congressional Black Caucus, who's been a civil rights leader across the years, who's been an outstanding pastor of New Bethel Baptist Church here in the District of Columbia, the Reverend Walter Fauntroy. Let's welcome him as he comes.
Thank you so very much, Herb, and Mr. Lemons, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am just as happy as I can be here this day. I want to first second what C. Payne Lucas has said. As a member of the AfriCare board for many years, I am so thrilled at the kind of support that the church has given to its efforts over these years. As one who supported Charlie Diggs as he launched his initiatives for Africa as a member of the Congress, particularly when he was chair of the first Congressional Black Caucus, and as one who, for the last 6 years, was chair of the Subcommittee on International Development, Finance, Trade, and Monetary Policy. I am thrilled at what this meeting means. It is my hope that we will go away from here today with at least three things. One, a policy position for which we can provide the kind of support in the church and the entire black leadership family before the Congress and before the administration. That will do at least three things. One, project the role of the kind of AfriCare programs that can be immediately instituted in Somalia. Two, to provide flows of resources north-south and not just west-east to deal with the long-term problems of Somalia in particular and Africa in general. C. Payne Lucas and Congressman Payne are aware of our efforts now to try to get this country to do, with respect to Africa, what it is now doing with respect to Eastern Europe and the former Soviet republics. We just voted a part of a G7 program for $24 billion to go west-east in order to support democracy in in the former Soviet Union and its 15 former republics. We do need, C. Payne, to make sure that as a part of what we advocate, that we work together on a specific kind of enterprise fund, such as we sent to Poland and Hungary to the tune of $240 million last year, to assist people in the startup of businesses and agricultural industries and agribusiness. So I hope we will do that. And then finally, I hope that we will come up with a specific program for seeing if we can't control the arms in a fashion that we can facilitate the kind of G7 program for $24 billion to go west-east in order to support democracy in in the former Soviet Union and its 15 former republics. We do need, C. Payne, to make sure that as a part of what we advocate, that we work together on a specific kind of enterprise fund, such as we sent to Poland and Hungary to the tune of $240 million last year, to assist people in the startup of businesses and agricultural industries and agribusiness. So I hope we will do that. And then finally, I hope that we will come up with a specific program for seeing if we can't control the arms in a fashion that we can facilitate the kind of negotiations for peaceful settlement in Somalia that we've been talking about. It does seem to me that we do have to focus on some sort of arms embargo so the arms merchants do not continue to feed the warlords, and perhaps even a process of disarming the fools. I mean, disarming those who are killing and keeping us from getting to the peace table. I think the urgency of all of this is such that we cannot wait a month or so. We've got a very important election this year. And God knows we need to lay on the agenda and on the minds of the candidates who seek our votes in 142 congressional districts. We're in a tight race. The black vote will determine who wins on November 3rd. And may I just simply say, I didn't mean to say all this, but during my 20 years in Capitol Hill, I was chair of the Congressional Black Caucus on black voter participation and network development. And I know that the black vote on November 3rd is to the election of the president what the umpire is to a baseball game. Now, C. Payne will tell you that I was the king of Capitol Hill and first baseman for the Democrats on Capitol Hill for 20 years. Fast as I am, every time I get on base, I steal. Second, I steal third. Every time I steal a base, Republicans say it's out. Democrats say it's safe. Umpire said he ain't nothing till I call it. You all know that the polls are saying it looks like it's going to be a tight race. I know that if we can get the Somalia issue on the agenda in terms of policy, Africare, a enterprise fund program and a disarmament program in the next month or so, and if we can get our people, particularly in our churches, if the 19 million church members alone get out to vote on November the 3rd, I assure you that the takeover of the other party by you-know-who are going to get theirs out, who believe that God and his mission are wrapped up in in a few family values. If we do our job, beginning with coming up with some hard policy, secondly, letting these two candidates, I don't want any more two of them, know where we stand, and 3, going out and getting the umpires out on November the 3rd to call somebody out. And call somebody safe. If you're interested in that safe person, see me after this this session.
Thank you, Dr. Fauntleroy. I've also been asked to make you aware that a representative of Senator Barbara Mikulski is also in our midst, Elijah Etheridge. Would they stand? Thank you so much for being present. And I've also been asked to bring to your attention the presence of the African Diplomatic Corps. If persons representing the Diplomatic Corps would also stand and introduce themselves.
From Senegal.
Pedro Cabral, Ambassador of Guinea-Bissau.
Dennis Afad, Ambassador of Kenya.
Aromo, Ambassador of Namibia.
Kapamwe, Counselor from the Embassy of Zambia.
Counselor from Djibouti.
Charles Nyirabu, Ambassador of Tanzania.
Shabani Boniface, Councillor Ambassador of Rwanda.
Ala Al-Hadid, the Embassy of Egypt.
Amen. Thank you so much for being present.
I'm Zilemba from Malawi Embassy.
Amen. I think it was Marcus Garvey who said that disorganization is the greatest enemy of the black man. The beauty of this meeting for me is that it inaugurates a potential collaboration and partnership between the Congress of National Black Churches and AfriCare, that these two organizations might work together to improve the conditions of our people on the motherland. We would like to bring to the podium to give further leadership in this meeting at this time the chairman of the board of the Congress of National Black Churches, the presiding bishop of the First Episcopal District of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop William Graves. I'd like you to welcome him, and he will direct us further into the program.
Thank you very much, Reverend Lemon. First of all, I'd like to join with others in expressing my gratitude to you church leaders who've come from across the country. We realize that it represents a great sacrifice, but we believe that it's worthy. We would also like to thank the AfriCare and United States Department and the Organization of African Unity and the Agency for International Development, Africa Watch, for bringing us together to brief us. We who are church leaders have a number of obligations and responsibilities. We appreciate you calling us together and briefing us on where we are nationally and internationally. We believe that the churches should continue to coordinate the strategies and the resources to assist not only in Somalia and Hurricane Andrew, but in all of the ongoing tragedies of this nation, which would include the joblessness, the drug abuse, and the homeless, etc. We believe that the church can do some things that government cannot do, while we admit that government can do some things that we cannot do. And so we've called you together today to suggest ways that we more effectively assist government and to try to abstract from you ways and suggestions that we can help. Now, I'd like to suggest that we realize that you may not get all you pay for, but we know you pay for what you get. A couple of things that we hope will happen today, and in a few minutes I'm going to call Michael Lemons up to sort of coordinate this. We won't ask questions, but I think I've said to Brother Lemon earlier this morning, we believe that the churches can suggest in concrete ways one Sunday in the near future that we ought to call on all of our churches to lift an offering. That is one concrete way. And that we would send these offerings to Congress of National Black Churches, and we'd give you further direction. Because we believe that the church needs to have a church-led and church-directed effort to help in all of these matters. Before we leave, being a preacher, we're going to ask that those of you who are gathered here would give an offering. We'll say more about that. Hopefully, it will not be less than $100. In Methodist circle, you never call a meeting together where you don't lift an offering. So we're going to suggest that before we leave. And then finally, we hope to abstract from you questions and suggestions as to how we may more effectively continue our efforts in these tragedies. Let me call upon Reverend Michael Lemons, who will direct our question and answer period, and also get your reaction on a couple of things that we believe to be important. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Graves. As the bishop indicated, the Congress does not necessarily have a preconceived notion as to how we should go about marshaling support for our sisters and brothers on the continent. We have some ideas, as the bishop has articulated, but we are certain that those of you who have traveled and gathered with us today also have ideas as to how the black church in America can respond on this agenda. Again, we view this not as a one-time response, but we are hopeful of organizing a continuing response for African issues through the Congress of National Black Churches, both in terms of policy issues as well as in terms of relief and support issues. So we'd like to open the floor to hear from those of you who have ideas as to how this campaign should be conducted and how we should go about marshaling this support. Yes, my sister.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Annie Alexander. I'm the co-chairperson of the Social Justice Ministry at Shiloh Baptist Church. Pastor is Reverend Wallace Charles Smith. Some of these things that I have to suggest are, you've already said that you want the church to choose one Sunday to collect funds. Shiloh will again send funds. Shiloh has already sent funds, by the way.
Amen. Bless you.
And Shiloh, I will propose to my minister your suggestion, and I'm sure that Shiloh will be more than eager to send more funds. Other ways I think that we can help, I don't know if we're allowed to send actual food and clothing material. Perhaps you can address that. If that's possible, we can also do that. Also, I don't know about medical supplies. That's also a possibility. Also, in terms of actual human bodies going there, I know Congressman Payne and Melvin have stated that they were having problems going there. I don't know if individuals can go there. I don't know if churches can go there. But if that's possible, then that would also be, that's also a suggestion. Doctors, Shiloh has doctors, many medical people in their congregation. You can solicit nurses and doctors to go and assist, people to help distribute the foods, all types of volunteers. Again, I know that Shiloh would be more than eager. I, for one, would love to go and help my brother and my brothers and my sisters in Somalia. I would love to go. And I even spoke with Melvin about that, and he said it's possible they may be going next week. I said, gee, that's such short notice, you know. But I would be more than willing. And he mentioned the danger factor. Well, I can't think of a greater way to die than giving your life for such a worthy cause as to save the lives of your own people. Thank you.
Bless you, my sister. Let me just ask Dr. Kennedy, can you just respond briefly to that, the items the sister indicated? But is it possible for us to
Certainly the food, clothing is needed, but it's better to send the money, because with the money we can go directly to Mogadishu on the spot, determine what the most pressing needs are. So sending the money, making that contribution is more significant than food or clothing. Thank you.
I go back to one of the Reverend Congressman Palmtroy's earlier suggestions about making policy and coming up with some policy statement. I think that is crucial. The second side of that is, first of all, in drafting that up, I think the three tenets that he suggested are those that we might be able to flesh out before even leaving here today. Secondly, after doing such, he raised another important question about connecting this with our vote for a candidate in November. I think it is important for us to find a way to identify a specific, particular, and effective way to get this agenda into the conversations of these two candidates. I have not heard any discussion on Somalia. I've heard them speak about Bosnia and other things during their campaign and aid to other countries. I've seen now that our president has just agreed to so as to acquiesce to the fighter plane manufacturers in the South. He's sending F-16s over to Taiwan. He's doing all these things. There's been no conversation about what exactly would either of these candidates do in relation to the Somalian crisis. I think that ought to be made clear. We ought to get an answer that can be articulated and disseminated back to the constituencies here, so that we might be able to mobilize our people and to tell them how to vote based on this issue.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Reverend Wilson?
Yes, I would like to say in reference to the thrust that we put forth here, I think the statement in terms of a policy statement that is crystallized, that everybody can identify with, is important. But I think second to that, we have a tremendous opportunity, given the fact that so many in our own community do not identify with the mother country,
right,
but that it is so interestingly profound that every parallel, or any parallel that you want to find in terms of what's going on there, is going on right here.
All right.
If you talk about the fact that was raised about who put the guns there and what's happening as a result of those guns being there, you talk about the same thing that's going on in every major city in the United States of America. If you talk about all the kinds and types of destabilization techniques that have been used there, that are being used in our community, and in fact, the literal face with annihilation and obliteration of our people, not only in Africa, but right here in the United States of America, that there is a need to develop that kind of identification. And in that regard, I think that given this as the nation's capital, that we can develop a plan that speaks to the commonality of the struggle in terms of what's going on right here in America, which would then create the kind of sensitivity to the issue, and then beyond that, and ongoing, since this is the nation's capital and the seat of the government right here in the nation's capital, that a comprehensive effort take place right here in Washington, which includes a lobbying plan of a consistent basis that speaks to going down to Congress and the White House and everywhere else every day until we get some action on these issues and raise the issue to get some action. And as well, then, because the kind of problems that we're faced, and this is not the first crisis, it won't be the last, and it's going to multiply itself in many other ways in coming months right here in the United States of America, that it becomes a unique opportunity to organize our people on a regular basis to kind of begin to speak to these problems and to not be crisis-oriented, but on an ongoing basis to come up with some strategies that speak to what's going on in every major city in this country, but as well identifies or relates to the fact that this is the same common struggle everywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Wilson. David?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. With the name God, the compassionate, the merciful. In addition to your very generous introduction, I think it's also fair for me to mention to those assembled that I am a Muslim and consider myself a representative of the ministry of Imam W. Dean Muhammad, who his office supports this program, and he's in Egypt today accepting an award. Last weekend in Atlanta, the Muslims had a convention and raised a considerable sum of funds for the effort in Somalia. But with that said, one of the things I feel would be important to come out of our meeting here today is a policy statement that we could agree upon and adopt that would form the framework for us to have a press conference so that the comments that have been made by Congressman Payne as well as Dr. Fauntleroy could be brought to the national attention right here in Washington so that people in the public can know the limitations that have been placed on Congress with respect to fulfilling their obligations to their constituencies to inquire for themselves the conditions in Somalia. And at the same time, I know myself, I'm a member of the National Bar Association. I'm sure that many other professional associations and other organizations right here in Washington would gladly support that effort so that this agenda item can be put on the national agenda so that they can be commented upon not only by the candidates that are running for national office, but also many of the local congressional candidates and candidates for the U.S. Senate. So I would gladly support and gladly participate in an effort to adopt and agree upon some policy issues that could form the basis for a press conference to be held as soon as possible to bring this issue to the national agenda.
Let me recognize the congressman. I think he wants to speak to that.
Just in general, I have to leave to go back to New Jersey. Got an election up there too, you know, but thought this was important. Let me just say that specific amounts, the U.S. has in the past 3 weeks come up. We have sent 2,386 metric tons of food to Somalia, about $148 million worth of food support. But there are things that could be done. For example, the European Common Community has done very little in this particular instance. The Japanese government has done absolutely nothing. We call them as late as yesterday. And to their knowledge, they had not sent one single bit of aid to Somalia. Now they don't grow grain. Of course, we can't sell rice there, but they don't grow grain. But they could pay for grain to go there. So I think there's a lot of things that we could do. As we pressure the U.S. government, as I pass down here, I see all those Toyotas and those Japanese cars. We've got to tell those people that they've got a responsibility also to do what is right. They have done not one single thing to date in Somalia. Secondly, there are things that can be done. For example, in Belgium, there's a group of doctors that they call themselves Doctors Without Walls, Médecins Sans Frontières. These are doctors who volunteer. AfriCare could very easily organize a group of African-American doctors who could give up their time for a period of time once there is some kind of order to go to Somalia to assist. 80% of the people need either nutritional or other kind of medical assistance. That could be something, if the Belgian folks can do it, why can't African Americans do it? We could have a corps of lawyers from the ABA, the National Bar Association, to go there to Somalia, because there will have to be courts of law set up. There will have to be governmental structures. Democratization is not easy. And we could have a corps of attorneys to assist in the development of the laws for that country. We have probably the greatest constitution in the world, was written in Namibia. First of all, they don't use gender. They say he and she. You know, our constitution written 300-400 years ago talks about he. They don't have gender. They've outlawed the death penalty. A person who marries a woman has as much right as a man. A man can become a citizen of that country. We need to look at Namibia's new constitution. But those are the kinds of assistance. We were in Ethiopia several weeks ago where they had an election. It didn't work well because the infrastructure was not right. It was the first election in decades. We should have had observers and assistants, political people over there to assist in that election in Ethiopia so that it could have worked better. It was a good effort. So I would be glad to work along with AfriCare. There are so many teachers, retired teachers, could go and stay there for 3 months to set up a teacher's corps and come back, but there are tremendous needs, and I'm going to charge C. Payne Lucas with coming up with a tool to bring those doctors there. And if we can't get into Somalia, you could go to Ethiopia. There's no problem there right now, or you can go to Zaire, or you can go to the other countries. Angola will have an election the end of this month. They've got more amputees in Angola than any country in the world. And so we also, though, have to influence public policy so that you can get elected. You sell F-16s to Taiwan, as has been mentioned just last night. They're going to sell 72 F-16s to Saudi Arabia. That means that Israel will want a few more. Then that means that Syria, who's now on this side, supposedly will try to get some more. And once again, we escalate the arms race on the F-16 level, whereas still down on the lower level, the arms that they have in Somalia are the same. So we should have a policy of non-proliferation. And if we have to lay off people who make F-16s, teach them how to clean the water or take asbestos out of schools. There are jobs that can be done. And so there are tremendous public policy issues that I think a group of this nature could have a tremendous amount of influence. And I would, like I said, be very pleased to work very closely with the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Payne. My brother.
Yeah, I have 3 things I want to say, and I try to frame them shortly. The problem in Somalia and Liberia is war. What the people need is a peaceful resolution to a particular conflict. You can keep sending in food. I'm a Liberian, and you can send in free food as long as you want to, as long as people still have guns at each other's heads. There will still be massive starvation. It's happening now in Liberia, it's happening in Somalia, and it will happen again. I think the suggestion that I can offer is that I think with the moral authority that most of us have as clergy persons, we can put together a coalition to negotiate with warring factions in Africa for peace. As long as there is no peace, temporary food won't do. That's the first suggestion I have. The second is that in addition to sending in food items, clothing and other things that are immediate emergency needs, we need to put together a long-term developmental program that the churches can foster through private voluntary organizations all over the continent of Africa. And these developmental programs need to take place both in terms of human resource development and economic development. And if we were to do those things, I think we take the higher ground, the long-term ground. We won't be meeting all the time to address crisis. We'll be meeting to look at sustaining developmental programs. And I think it's important that we look for peace and we look for ways to help the people to help themselves. Self-help projects that can be fostered. Individual churches can adopt villages. Individuals that have a lot of money can adopt children in schools, help to build schools. $50,000 can build schools and help to support teachers annually so that education can take place. And when those positive things are taking place, there would not be enough room for tyrants to rise up and slaughter and maim and dehumanize our people. And so I'm asking you, whatever you do, take some positive action towards bringing peace to the people. They need peace, and the food will come if they get peace.
Reverend Toggle.
Reverend Lemons, I'd just like to say that I believe that God will have the victory. Also, I believe that in accountability. I'm going to be very honest with you. I came over here from Baltimore through our relationship, and I thank God for you and for CNBC. I mean, here we already have an established foundation through CNBC. Now, the word is that it represents 19 million folk. And I guarantee you 19 million folk do not know the situation. So we have to go back to accountability. What I want to take back to Baltimore and in that vicinity is, look, there's a problem there. And everyone have to take it to every town, every city, every rural area, and say, look, we have a serious problem. Now, there's an organization that we can send our money to. Let's be honest, y'all, because it's going to come down to money.
Right.
The whole deal is going to come down to money. And we have to make folk accountable, even the major black denominations. In other words, let's change that mandate. Let's make a mandate to say, look, this foreign mission money, let's do something with it. We know we have a serious, immediate problem. Let's transfer some money there. Let's get something done. All right, because I don't think you can go on 33rd Street or down Little Rock until you come home first. It has to start in Jerusalem. And I'm a firm believer that if anything, make folk accountable, make the Black Caucus, national, local, and the state accountable, make the pastors accountable. In other words, if we were just to pool our money just one time,
Right.
just for this cause, just put everything else aside, and we pool out money, I guarantee you things will happen. And also, let's pray.
All right.
Prayer can get places where they won't come to the table.
Yes, sir.
Prayer get there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Reverend Tuggle.
Hello, my name is Bilal Warsame. I'm Somali, and I'm here on the behalf of non-profit, non-tribal-based Somali organization named YOSAD, Youth of Somalia Against Tribalism. Yes, we have a starvation problem in Somalia, but we also have a clan and tribal problems. This is a method that Europeans or the colonies have used to divide and conquer the continent of Africa. And it's our responsibility to unite our people. I just want to let you know that even though the crisis has been going on in Somalia longer than Yugoslavia, and the crises are much worse in Somalia than they are in Yugoslavia, the United Nations have sent 15,000, more than 15,000 troops. This is basically troops that would escort and protect humanitarian assistance and humanitarian relief workers. They only have sent 500 to Somalia. Actually, they're not even there yet, and the 3,000 they're talking about. We need at least 6,000 to 9,000 humanitarian escorts. So they would be able to deliver the food from the ports or other destinations to the rural areas as well as to Mogadishu. I'm from Mogadishu. Originally, Mogadishu is not getting half of its food it needs, and but the fact is the other regions or other remote areas have been getting actually less because too much attention has been focused on the capital. Okay. And one of the things that Yugoslavia has been getting this attention is because the Europeans are fighting for them, the European leaders, white Americans are fighting for them, whereas our brothers have failed us. The African neighboring countries, even though we've been dealing with Kenya, they've been very nice. And African Americans, this is the first time actually that we have been, that we have been. But I'm saying it's never too late. Yes, over 100,000 Somali people have already starved to death. Okay, but we can still save the people in the home. And if we are to save the people of Somalia, we are the people who will make the difference, who can make the difference, not the UNS, because they have a lot of bureaucracy and they will not get the job done. So please, and here actually today that we have so many high officials in African embassies, shows me at least that there is a new commitment to the Somali problems as well as the African problems, and also the African and our African brothers are here, that there are new commitments that will be able to solve our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.
May I ask you the simple question of what can this group do today
to get the kind of military or whatever protection that's needed? What avenue do we have?
Okay.
If the UN is not going to do it, what can the United States or this group, since that seems to be at this point the most crucial need is protection, so what is already being sent can get to the people?
Exactly. I'd like to answer your question. Yes, our first goal as an organization, and actually our first goal should be to save the Africans from starving to death, and that's humanitarian. And what we can do is, we have already done it. We increase the public awareness, to come with us to rallies and protest peacefully in front of the State Department, to pressure our elected officials to let or give the permission to the people like Africa Care to be able to go to Somalia, to put a lot of pressure on the UN, and those are things that we can do. And this is not just a conference. And that's actually, I don't take it just a conference. This is a beginning of the solution to the Somali problem at the moment, and perhaps the African problems later on, because they need the help, or our help, most today.
Did Africa address that?
What? You want to speak to that? Sure.
You know, may I begin by just answering your question? Somebody said God answers prayer. You know, after mouthing off all these three things we ought to do, I said, Lord, please give me something. You know what I did? I looked into this folder. You know, the Lord has already prepared for us what we need to do. Look at this piece that says Africa, Somalia relief, famine relief. See, oh, Payne is gone now. Yeah. Payne, Congressman Payne is gone, but it is a thorough treatment of what needs to be done right now, including provision of emergency medicine, water supplies, feeding supplies, blankets and clothing delivered immediately in Somalia. And I would just like to suggest that maybe one of the things we need to do is to announce our Sunday, raise the funds to equip Africa at least halfway to do this, because Uncle Bubba's got to do the rest. I mean, we've got Section 880 funds available for emergencies that are being dipped into for other things. We can add it to that. Secondly, with respect to your question, how do we secure the distribution? I don't want you to think as a nonviolent advocate that I believe that guns have a role, but quite frankly, those people are going to have to be protected. And somebody's going to have some troops with some serious weapons. And so I think that the group that we get to protect the caucus members when they go next week, they can protect caucus members looking around and see what's going on, and begin to push both the UN and the U.S. to do what it did, what it's preparing to do in Bosnia. You heard what they're shooting at? They're killing UN representatives, but they're not going to stand for that. And the cats, I mean, the people in Somalia don't have as serious weapons as the arms merchants have provided in Yugoslavia. So that I think we've got to be rather specific about seeing to it, first of all, that our people go protected, and two, that if we send all this money, we raise all this money in our churches, then Africa, which is our vehicle, has got to be protected and get it to the people who need it where they need it. And so I want to see our armies, I mean our military might facilitate the delivery of these emergency products, the details of which the Lord has already placed in our yes, He did. Amen. Hallelujah.
Thank you, Congressman. Let me recognize Bishop McKinley Young, and then recognize Sharon Pauling of Bread for the World.
Congressman Fontroy has spoken to the issue I wanted to address. However, I want to push it a little further. Half of the American constituency could not tell you what Somalia is. You know, geography is very poor for the United States. Most of our children can't tell you where some parts of the country are. And that's very tragic. But many people cannot tell you where Somalia is, what's involved, where it's located, and we need to take on as creative an effort as is imaginable for us to find ways, innovative ways, to help enlighten and to do consciousness raising to the point that our people have a radical identification with Somalia as a vital part of our own survival. Right now, it's some other place in some distant land to which we have only tactical affiliation. So we need to find, and perhaps the people who are here today can help come up with some ingenious and creative ways where we might educate our children, might make it a part of the conversation. And you know, if black America is not informed about where it is, then you know white America is totally ignorant as to where it is and what ought to be done. So I think there has to be a clear commitment on the part of this body to do consciousness raising and education for our constituency, black and white, the pluralistic community in America, so that we are informed and are aware as to where it is, where it's located, what we need to do, and the urgency of now. In the bosom of crisis and challenge always lie opportunity.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop. Mel?
I'd like to respond to the education mission. My job here at Africa is largely one of educating the American public about Africa, and you're absolutely correct. The biggest issue, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest crisis in Africa is that here in America and the lack of understanding about Americans about Africa. But I want to suggest to you, Africa has been working for the last 10 years to educate Americans about Africa. Our other mission, in addition to what we do in Africa, is also develop education. And in fact, the women who are up front here just flew in from Detroit why don't you stand up? They're with Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority in Detroit, Michigan. And they're here on an education mission. And we're going to have an all-day workshop after this session closed and tomorrow to give them methodologies and approaches and strategies, and also resources in the way of videotapes and visual aids to educate the Michigan community about Africa and African development issues. I want to suggest that churches that want to organize an education component within their church, we're ready and available to work with you and assist you in that effort. We want to train the trainer. We want to train a cadre of people within your church community that can actually go ahead and carry the message. But Africa, again, is a major resource for you in an educational endeavor.
Give me just a second, my sister. Several brilliant strategies have been already articulated. We certainly want to hear from everyone who's standing at this point. Let me just recognize Ms. Pollard, who has to leave from Bread for the World, and then we recognize other persons who are standing, and then try to bring this into some sort of close.
Thank you for the space. Sharon Pauling with Bread for the World. Have been in Somalia twice in the last 2 years, and just recently got back from a trip to Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And I guess what I want to do is put the group on notice that unless we respond to Mozambique similarly, it's going to be the next Somalia. I'll table that, and I'd like to focus my comments right now on the situation in Somalia. I would encourage all of you to, on this issue of education, to talk more about Somalia in your church publications. I know many denominations are represented here, and it's true that most of us really don't know that the country exists. If it hadn't have been, I think, for the most recent media attention, finally, to the crisis in Somalia, many of us would still not know that there is this country and that it's in dire need. And as an African-American community, we have an even greater responsibility to be responsive. There's been a lot of stress on moving beyond food aid to meeting reconstruction needs in the region. All of Somalia is not at war right now. There are pockets in the country where there's great need for rebuilding infrastructure, getting farming going again. When I was there, it was just awful in terms of the amount of not only social disintegration, but also physical disintegration in terms of the need to build up schools, build up housing. There are very great needs that speak to the young man's concerns about long-term development. Absolutely a need. Bread for the World has basically put together a three-point sort of immediate kind of a plan that we've been addressing to the U.S. Congress. One certainly is that we need to move in as quickly as possible to flood the country with food in all areas. I've been, quite frankly, distressed that most of the focus has been on Mogadishu, where most of the fighting in. The whole country is at need. People are starving all over the country. And to the extent that AfriCare and other agencies can operate in other areas to act as a magnet to attract people out of the most insecure areas, that's absolutely critical. The second thing is that we need to be supporting the UN peacekeeping forces going in, and this is in response to your concern about immediate protection for not only food but relief workers. The UN has been passing resolution on top of resolution since Boutros-Ghali became Secretary General. This last resolution said we need to do yet again another assessment to see whether or not we can send in peacekeeping forces. Now there's been an agreement that 500 armed security forces will go into the country. They need to be in there yesterday. The Security Council has agreed to another 3,000. We need to be petitioning our government to petition the Security Council to move that 3,000 force into the country, not to instigate more trouble, but quite frankly just to protect the movement of food and supplies and relief workers. And if AfriCare is going to be very active there, to protect whatever work AfriCare is going to be doing in the country. The third thing, and very critical thing, is that there is yet to be a conflict mechanism, conflict resolution mechanism in place. It's critical that all of the various parties, clans, sub-clans, traditional leaders, elders, be brought together to the table to begin to a process of negotiation. One, so that it helps with building cooperation for immediate humanitarian activity, as well as moving the various parties toward long-term resolution of the problem so that we can begin to see a Somalia that's on its way toward peace and stability. One last comment, and that has to do with the U.S. Congress and fiscal 93 appropriations. Bread for the World, along with AfriCare and a number of other groups, have been busy in Congress trying to raise the levels of PL 480 Title II food aid. That's the emergency aid that's distributed to emergency areas worldwide. With quick action between March and now, we've been able to raise the fiscal 93 levels up by 100 million so that the very urgent needs in not only Somalia but Southern Africa can be met, and so that Bosnia and the former Soviet Union and all those areas are not the only countries that have first dibs on food aid. The other area of need, and that's still currently under consideration, and this is where some of you may make a difference. Next week, the Senate Appropriations Committee is going to be marking up or considering its fiscal 93 foreign aid bill. In that bill is a figure for $80 million that would meet non-food needs, transportation, infrastructure, seeds, tools, all those things that are absolutely critical for Somalia's pulling itself out of this trouble right now. We need to be saying to our senators that are on the Appropriations Committee, include in your bill $80 million to meet needs not only in Somalia but also in Southern Africa. And then we need to petition USAID that the countries that are of greatest need will get first dibs on that funding. So $80 million for disaster aid to sub-Saharan Africa. That decision is going to be made next week. It's absolutely critical that we communicate our desire for that assistance to our senators. Thank you.
We want to recognize all the persons who are standing at this point. I must ask you to please be pointed in your presentation so that we will not go on too long. We want to make some decisions and then have lunch and then go forward. So I recognize my sister here to the left, then we come back over here.
Thank you. First, I would like to ask all African Americans, and especially our African brothers and sisters, ambassadors in Africa, to please help Somalis. One thing that can be done is lobbying. You can lobby the United Nations, you can lobby the White House, you can lobby the Congress in ensuring that we do get the peacemaking and peacekeeping force. I'll just briefly say why we feel this is a solution. The reason we feel this is an absolutely necessary solution is for 18 months, the country had no government or any institution whatsoever. And in that 18 months, you had the whole country disintegrating, and you had not only people starving a few blocks away while the food was going to Mogadishu alone and being looted by few warlords. I would like to also point out that we need the peacekeeping and peacemaking force, not because we believe in colonization. Let me tell you, I'm the independence generation. But there has to be a point when a person reaches, this is a crime to humanity. The crime to humanity requires that solution be done. I used to demonstrate in every American intervention in the world, which I thought it was all wrong. And now I'm not asking America to colonize Somalia. What I'm asking is, you have maximum 2,000 mobile, well-armed destruction units. And is these 2,000 mobile destruction units who have the weapons from the old dictator be responsible for the death of the rest of the country? If you have simply the mere presence of a U.S. force, would it deter them? They will run out of fuel soon. The point is, if they don't have the fuel that they loot, they cannot move around the country. If they don't have the food to loot, they can't lure the young men to be thugs for them. If they don't have the mechanism to move around to a new town and loot the whole town and ship everything out of that town, then the young boys would not be following them. And what we need is a peacemaking. Note the difference, please. Peacemaking and peacekeeping force. The peacemaking ensures that there's a sanctuary place within the country in which the civilian people can get inside these camps. And then what you do is you feed the civilians and you protect them from human rights abuses. They talk only about security of the food. But can you imagine what it is for people to live under them? They talk about one UN force dying. How about the 1,000 young women and children and elders dying every day on basis of a clan? So what we're saying is, you put in the mechanism to secure the country from looters and killers and butchers. You take away the incentive for warlording and warmongering. Then you will realize that 99% of the Somali civilians will support everybody, and we will be willing to negotiate. We are proud people. We don't want colonization, but the guns were not made, and the warlords have the guns. They are the same warlords that allow toxic nuclear waste to be dumped into the country. And that's the type of people they have been negotiating in the UN. Okay. So please, work on that. The rest will resolve itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me do this. Let me indicate some of the policy positions which you have articulated so that maybe some of you who are up will not need to reiterate them. One is that we've heard a very strong insistence that we come out of this meeting with a policy statement. So one of the first things we're interested in happening is for persons to volunteer to help draft a statement while we're here today, immediately following this meeting, that can be read for C-SPAN's benefit, who's here taping this, as a preliminary policy statement as to where we are. Do we have consensus on that? Are there persons who are willing to serve? We're asking Reverend Fontroy. Where's Congressman Fontroy? Okay.
Let me know when I'm not on the block. I'm around here in my neighborhood. That's why.
If Reverend Fontroy would give leadership to this, and if there are persons who are willing to serve on that committee, if you would raise your hand or stand, that we can get your names right now. Let me start over here to my left. My sister, would you give us your name?
Faye Anderson with the Council of 100.
Okay. Diane, you all getting that? Okay. Faye Anderson. Okay. My sister?
Oh, Alma Crawford, Bread for the World.
Alma Crawford, Bread for the World. David Shahid. Yes, brother.
Yes, Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali.
Kamal Hamoud.
Didn't get your name, my brother.
Kamal Hamoud.
Kamal. My sister.
NGO.
Okay.
Billy. Billy works on me. W-A-R.
Okay. Okay, we're interested in some more clergy representation as well. I'm not seeing as many clergy. Wendell Anthony, my brother. Okay. Okay, Reverend Anthony. Reverend Sparrow, okay. Okay, now, Forrest, can you designate the room where this committee can go shortly to begin working on the statement? Just tell us.
That'll be the Africa conference.
That'd be the conference room. Okay, now that's one thing we've done. We've identified the committee. The second thing we'd like to get support for is the holding of a Somalian Sunday in our churches across the country. The Congress represents some 65,000 churches. We have some question, however, as to our ability to have direct contact with that number of churches that represents our 8 denominations. But we would like to lift up, if you would support this idea, the Congress attempting to be in direct contact with 5,000 black churches across the country to request their participation and support for a Somalian Sunday, which we'd like to suggest, if you support it, the first Sunday in October, to give us enough time to get the word out and to have you go back to your community. The third thing is that we would like for the contributions to come to the Congress of National Black Churches under the name CNBC/Somalian Relief. CNBC/Somalian Relief. I don't think that we should articulate an amount. However, it seems it might be helpful for the idea to be gotten across that if every black Christian were to give, or every African American person, let me take the Christian label off, if every African American person were to give $10, those who can give more, but just to give $10, if we were to reach a significant number of persons doing that, everyone, just about everyone could give $10. And we would like to lift that up as also a possible strategy for people to respond and to eliminate excuses for people not responding. Now, those are some of the major things that we would like to see happen in addition to doing the offering before you all begin to disperse on us. Now, if there are persons who are standing who want to speak to issues beyond those, but please, very briefly so that we can wrap up and come back with a statement for C-SPAN. Wendell?
Offering is the only aid we're talking about. Is not tools or agricultural mechanisms or blankets or anything. That's just the offering.
Thank you for asking that, Wendell. What the Congress of National Black Churches is offering to be is a vehicle, a conduit. We will be turning our funds received over to AfriCare, which has a track record for delivery of the supplies and assessing the particular needs which need to be addressed. So we will be giving the monies to AfriCare. The Congress has taken the step of inviting a point person, Alva, would you stand? Alva Franklin, who will coordinate this from the office of the Congress and who will attempt to be in contact with these 5,000 churches to ask each of them to contribute. But once we receive the dollars, we will then be turning them over to AfriCare, believing that they're in the best position to actually deliver the funds and to assess the exact needs which need to be addressed. The address of the Congress is 1225 I Street Northwest. Let me just get the address out, my brother. Let me just get the address out. 1225 I Street Northwest, Suite 750, Washington, D.C., 2005. It should be on some of the materials that you have in your packets. Okay. Yes, my brother.
My name is Seth Moulton, and I'm representing the one of the representatives of the AME Zion Church. I think when you suggested that we take October, the first Sunday in October, to be Somalia Sunday, what happens to the concerns for the rest of Southern Africa? And the lady alluded to that earlier when she mentions that the drought is coming southward. Could those who are developing or crafting this policy sort of suggest one Sunday a year?
Sure. Let's refer that to our committee to give consideration to that. Can we
Thank
do that?
you.
Okay.
As has been pointed out, across the continent of Africa, there's tremendous potential, but there are tremendous problems. And there is this tremendous drought clear across southern Africa, affecting nearly 30 million people. That is another tragedy. Now, AfriCare, along with other organizations, other private volunteer organizations, we're working in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Angola, Mozambique. We are there. The issues are all around us. What we are trying to do here today is to mobilize around Somalia and this issue. Let's tackle it. Let's solve it. And then we'll move on to the others. So the other parts of Africa are not being neglected. We're doing things across the continent. But right now, it is the people of Somalia that need our immediate help.
Let me do this, please. Let me do this. I see that we're losing one or two persons. I want to give an opportunity for everyone who is here, first of all, to give. I think that we need to make a very tangible response today and to ask Bishop Graves to come up and to give leadership to that. CG, were you going to speak to that issue? Okay.
As the dean of a school, it's commonplace for me to ask money and not give it, particularly my students. But the Howard School of Divinity has already taken up $110 on behalf of this effort. We'll continue to push it in the life of our school, but I have already to give to this effort on my own behalf $500.
Thank you, Dr. Newsom. Where's our comptroller, Reverend Davis? Okay. Yes, let's take it off. Bishop, why don't you come and give leadership to this?
Thank you very much. I think simply we're asking those who will to give a contribution today to this relief effort in Somalia. And we're asking that the checks, I've already cleared this with Mr. Payne, be made payable to CNBC/Somalia Relief Fund. If you would do that, we would appreciate it very much. Give what you can, but I know that people sometimes need a suggestion. I would suggest that you begin with at least $100 if you can. Then if you cannot, then give whatever you can. I'm going to give likely...
Following Friday's meeting focusing on famine in Somalia, the summit members held a news conference, and we will now bring you that event.
We thank you for being here at this emergency summit that was called by the Congress of National Black Churches in conjunction with AfriCare and the Constituency for Africa. We called the Black Church together today out of an interest in responding to the critical needs of our brothers and sisters in Somalia. And a number of ideas and strategies were articulated today. A committee under the chairmanship of Reverend Walter Fauntleroy has drafted a statement which will indicate the steps which the Congress of National Black Churches would like to take from this point forward to respond to these issues in some very specific ways. Would like at this time, with Bishop Graves' permission, the chairman of the board of the Congress of National Black Churches, to call Reverend Walter Fauntleroy to the podium, who will indicate the policy statement that has been drafted as our initial statement on this issue. Reverend Fauntleroy.
Thank you, Mr. Lemons. Today, in the long tradition of prophetic advocacy, the Congress of National Black Churches assembled here at AfriCare has called upon the nation in our world to assume its duty for justice, compassion, and equity in resolving the pain and suffering of the people of Somalia. Specifically, we are launching today initiatives in 3 areas. First, that of emergency humanitarian assistance. Second, that of providing security in Somalia. And third, that of developing and implementing a long-term human resources and economic development policy to be followed by our country with respect to Somalia to begin with, but then with respect also to all of Africa. let me outline what we propose to do in terms of emergency humanitarian assistance. The Congress of National Black Churches is not going to ask anyone to do what we first ourselves are not willing to do. And so we are announcing today that on the Sabbath weekend of September 30th and October 1st, we will be observing Somalia Sunday in our churches for the purpose of having churchmen and women give money through the Congress of National Black Churches for the purpose of providing emergency food and other assistance in Somalia in the coming weeks. Secondly, with respect to emergency assistance, we are asking that the Congressional Black Caucus lead a delegation of African Americans and those interested in addressing the human need in Somalia to Somalia with adequate protection from our government for purposes of getting an on-the-ground latest assessment of where the funds we will raise can best be utilized. Beyond that, we are calling upon our government to take two specific actions in the coming weeks to provide additional resources for meeting the human needs in Somalia. First, we're calling upon the House and Senate to pass additional PL 480 aid, food aid, to be targeted for the starving of Somalia. Second, we are calling upon the Senate Appropriations Committee to pass next week an $80 million appropriation of non-food aid disaster assistance for Somalia. Armed with these official actions by our government and the additional support that our church leaders and members will provide, we believe that an organization like AfriCare, which has a long history in Somalia of administering emergency food and development assistance, would be provided resources necessary to give feet to our prayers and content to our concern as expressed here. The second area that I indicated as one which upon which we call the nation to take action is that of security. In that regard, we have three specifics. We ask first that the United Nations be urged and supported in its commitment of 500 security forces to facilitate the distribution of the food aid that is arriving in Somalia from all over the world. Second, we call upon the speedy implementation, if necessary, of the 3,000 troop commitment that has been made by the United Nations Security Council. We further call upon, third, our government, that in the event that the 500 and the 3,000 are not sufficient to assure the warlords who would have people who continue to starve to death, that we mean business, that the United States would commit whatever resources are necessary to assure that the food aid and emergency assistance that we are calling for from the private sector and that from our government gets to the people who need it. Finally, with respect to emergency and security matters, we call upon our government to facilitate the establishment of a conflict resolution mechanism that can go into effect immediately, even as we facilitate the flow of food and emergency equipment to the people of Somalia, and even as we assure that the security necessary to get it to them is there. The final area of policy that we want addressed as a result of this conference is that the United States government would embark upon a program to which it has become quite accustomed now in terms of our aid to former Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe, and now to Russia and the 14 former Soviet republics. Specifically, we have developed a support for democracy and open markets program by which we have committed hundreds of millions of dollars to the people of the former Soviet Union and their satellites for purposes of providing loans, grants, equity investments, training, feasibility studies, loan guarantees, and insurance for the startup of economic enterprise in the area of agribusiness, manufacturing, and infrastructure development. We specifically call upon our government to establish, as it has in Poland and Hungary, and now in Russia and the former Soviet republics, a Somalian enterprise fund which would commit an amount of U.S. funds not yet determined to a group of African American development interests in joint venture with Somalian development interests for the purpose of promoting the long-term human resources and economic development of the starving and pained people of Somalia. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. That concludes our statement. We will now go forth to implement these measures. We request your prayers and your assistance on this agenda. Thank you so very much.
Be with us Saturday for America and the Courts. You will see an address by Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun, the oldest sitting member on the court. He discusses his tenure, the direction in which the court and the nation are moving, and his eventual retirement. You will also meet Terrence Moran of Legal Times, who talked with us this week about the politics of federal court judicial nominations. America and the Courts, Saturday beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time, here on C-SPAN. Coming next, it's News 1, Friday night's evening newscast from